Chapter 1, The First Whisper. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of your own voice calling your name. That's exactly what happened to me last Friday. I live alone, but there it was, clear as day, my own voice echoing through the dark hallway. Jason, the whisper was unmistakable. My heart pounded as I sat up in bed, my eyes darting around the room. My name echoed through the dark hallway, clear as day. But I live alone. I listened intently, straining to hear any other sounds. Was it just my imagination? I shook my head, trying to dismiss the irrational fear creeping up my spine. But there it was again. Jason. I had to know where it was coming from. I slipped out of bed, my feet hitting the cold wooden floor. The house was eerily silent except for the whisper of my name. I tiptoed towards the door, peering into the dark hallway. Every instinct told me to turn back, but curiosity or perhaps something more compelled me forward. The air grew colder with each step, and the shadows seemed to grow darker and more menacing. I reached the top of the staircase and peered down into the pitch-black void of the lower floor. My heartbeat echoed in my ears as I slowly descended, gripping the banister tightly. Jason. The voice was coming from the basement. I rarely ventured down there. It was a place filled with old memories and forgotten items, covered in dust and cobwebs. I hesitated at the basement door, my hand trembling as I reached for the light switch. The bulb flickered to life, casting a dim, yellowish glow over the wooden steps. With a deep breath, I made my way down. The basement smelled musty and old, a stark contrast to the rest of the house. The voice grew louder, more insistent. My own voice. Jason. I followed the sound to the far corner of the basement, where an old, dusty mirror stood propped against the wall. It was an antique, something I had inherited from my grandmother but never had the heart to throw away. The mirror's surface was clouded with age, but my reflection stared back at me, eerily clear. Something was terribly wrong. My reflection wore a twisted, sinister grin, a grin that I wasn't wearing. It raised its hand and pointed behind me. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, to see nothing but empty darkness. When I looked back at the mirror, my reflection was gone. In its place was a message, written in what looked like blood: "You're not alone." Chapter 2, The Growing Fear. From that night on, the whisper haunted me. Every night at midnight, my own voice called out to me, growing louder and more insistent. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was just a nightmare or a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The nights became a blur of sleeplessness and fear. I avoided the basement at all costs, locking the door and pretending it didn't exist. But the whisper persisted, relentless and unforgiving. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye, shadows moving where there shouldn't be any, flickers of light in the darkness. My reflection in mirrors seemed to have a life of its own, sometimes not quite matching my movements, as if it were a fraction of a second out of sync. One particularly sleepless night, I decided to do some research. I scoured the internet for anything that could explain what was happening. Stories of haunted mirrors, spirits, and doppelgangers filled my screen. Most were dismissed as urban legends or horror fiction, but some felt disturbingly real. One story, in particular, caught my eye. It was about a man who had experienced something similar, a voice calling his name, a malevolent reflection, messages written in blood. The story ended with the man's disappearance, his house found empty with only a broken mirror left behind. I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. Was I next? Was this some kind of curse? I needed answers, and I needed them fast. Chapter 3, Seeking Help. Desperate for help, I confided in my friend Sarah. She was skeptical at first, but the fear in my eyes must have convinced her to take me seriously. "You need to get rid of that mirror," she said firmly after I told her everything. "Whatever is happening, it's connected to that thing." I nodded, knowing she was right but dreading the thought of facing it again. Together, we made a plan to get rid of the mirror the next day. That night, I could barely sleep. The whisper was louder than ever, and the sense of dread was overwhelming. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the first light of dawn. When morning finally came, Sarah arrived with a sledgehammer and a determined look on her face. We went down to the basement together, my heart racing with each step. The mirror stood there, seemingly innocent but radiating a palpable sense of malevolence. I hesitated, but Sarah didn't. She swung the sledgehammer with all her might, shattering the glass into 1,000 pieces. For a moment, there was silence. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. But then, the whisper returned. "Jason." It was louder than ever, reverberating through the basement. The shards of the broken mirror began to move, swirling, and coalescing into a shape, a dark, shadowy figure that seemed to suck the light out of the room. Sarah and I stumbled back, watching in horror as the figure solidified, taking on a form that was disturbingly familiar. It was me, or rather, a twisted, malevolent version of me. "Jason, you can't get rid of me that easily," it hissed, its voice a distorted echo of my own. Chapter 4, The Mirror's Secret. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The mirror was not the source of the haunting, it was merely a conduit, a gateway for whatever malevolent entity had latched onto me. Destroying it had only freed the entity from its confines, allowing it to manifest more fully in my world. Sarah and I fled the basement, slamming the door behind us. We sat in the living room, our minds racing as we tried to comprehend what had just happened. "We need to find out more about that mirror," Sarah said finally, breaking the silence. "There has to be a way to stop this thing." I nodded, my mind already turning to the few memories I had of the mirror's origins. My grandmother had always been secretive about it, insisting it was a family heirloom with a long and mysterious history. But she had never spoken of anything supernatural. We decided to visit my grandmother's old house, hoping to find some clues about the mirror's origins. The house had been abandoned since her passing, but the memories of my childhood visits were still fresh in my mind. The house was just as I remembered it, a quaint, old-fashioned home filled with antique furniture and knickknacks. We searched through her belongings, looking for anything that could shed light on the mirror's history. In the attic, we found a dusty old trunk filled with my grandmother's journals. As we flipped through the pages, one entry caught our attention. It was dated decades ago, and detailed a strange encounter she had had with the mirror. My grandmother always told me never to look into the mirror at night, the entry read. She said it was a portal, a gateway to another world. She believed that something evil lived on the other side, waiting for its chance to break through. The entry went on to describe how my grandmother had acquired the mirror from a mysterious antique dealer who warned her of its dark history. The dealer claimed it was crafted by a sorcerer who used it to trap malevolent spirits, but over time, the spirits had grown stronger, seeking a way to escape. Sarah and I exchanged a worried glance. It seemed we were dealing with something far more dangerous than we had imagined. Chapter 5: Confronting the Darkness. Armed with this new knowledge, we knew we had to find a way to banish the entity once and for all. Sarah suggested we seek help from a paranormal expert, someone who might know how to deal with such malevolent spirits. We found a local expert named Dr. Emily Hastings, who specialized in hauntings and supernatural occurrences. She listened to our story with a calm, professional demeanor, but I could see the concern in her eyes. This entity has been bound to your family for generations, she explained. Destroying the mirror was a start, but it's not enough. We need to perform a ritual to sever its connection to you and banish it back to where it came from. Dr. Hastings instructed us to gather certain items for the ritual: a circle of salt for protection, candles, and a sacred text she provided that contained the incantations we would need. We prepared everything meticulously, knowing that any mistake could be disastrous. The night of the ritual, we gathered in the basement, where the shattered remnants of the mirror still lay. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the air heavy with anticipation. We formed a circle of salt around us, lit the candles, and began the incantations. As we chanted, the air grew colder, and the shadows deepened. The entity appeared again, its form a swirling mass of darkness that began to take on a more defined shape, a grotesque, twisted version of myself. "Jason," it hissed, its voice a distorted echo of my own. "You.